Hello everybody, welcome back to Camping and Ham Radio with W4POT. I thought I would talk today about the first HF radio I ever bought. That is a Yaesu FT817ND. It's a QRP rig. That's the vinyl case that it came with, although I didn't spend much time using it inside the case. One of the very first modifications I did to my FT817 was a peg leg kit. These legs were sold by a third party. I want to say Palm, P-A-L-M, the same people that made a really small key. And so you would order the kit, and then you would take off the strap brackets and you will put these on so you could get a little elevation. Another mod that's been done is you'll notice where the charging power cord normally would go straight in to this socket on the back. So this has got an adapter for use with power poles installed. So on the back of the radio, we've got a PL259 for antenna, AGC data key, power. On the side of the radio, mic, speaker phone. On the front, there's also a B and C for antenna. So one of the things when you operate the radio, per band, you'll tell it which antenna connection to use. In order to change that, you have to go down into the menus and change it. There's a small internal battery that's located inside. Nickel metal hydride battery pack, FNB 85, 9.6 volts, 1400 milliamp hours, 14 watt hours. The battery charge rate is 140 milliamp, 15 hours. So if you start doing the math, you'll see that you could take your radio to the park, you could use it for a little while, and then this internal battery pack's charge would be used up, and then you would have to stop and spend 15 hours very slowly recharging it. So that's probably why it's no surprise that a lot of people chose to use external power to power the radio. Also, at full power, 5 watts, the battery didn't last that long, so a lot of people would run it at the default 2.5 watts when using the internal battery, and then only when on external power run it at the full 5 watts. For a QRP radio like this, how long would the internal battery last? I can recall sometimes going to the park starting at 9 o'clock in the morning and pretty much seeing low battery indications by noon. It's about 3 hours of operation on single sideband. Now here's another mod. It helped the operation on single sideband, but it also helped you go through the battery quicker. And that was the Soda Beams speech compressor. So as long as you were using single sideband and the microphone, you would flip this on. This would be plugged in the side where the mic goes, and the reports that I would get would indicate 1 or 2 S numbers better because it was using the compressor, and it would drive the radio a little bit harder. That was a good thing. Helped you go through the battery quicker, but it also helped you be a little bit louder to people on the other end. Now as far as FT8 goes, that was possible with that connector in the back. I bought a little box, let me show it to you. Bought a little box called the Woofy Link that would let me use programs running on an Android device with the Yaesu, but I never really got it to work right. Plus, when I first started on HF, I was a hardhead. I was out in the park with a bunch of guys doing CW only, and I wanted to be single sideband. So I said, no, you know what, I think for my first year of operating, I'm going to just do single sideband. They're like, oh, starting on single sideband QRP is tough. You know, we're at the bottom of a sunspot cycle. It's like, fine, then that's what I'm going to do. And so I used this for a while, just exclusively single sideband, although more often than not, I would bring a battery pack like this and use a 12-volt cable or the cable with the Anderson power pole to go into the back of the radio. Now, my first antennas were not resonant, so I had to get an antenna tuner. I'm going to show that to you. And so the antenna tuner I got was the LDG 817 auto tuner. And it's got a holder, a little tray of batteries inside, antenna TX, and a cable to the radio. And if you needed it, cable to the computer. I just needed one to the radio. And what you would do is, when you were ready to tune, you could push and hold the tune button and then let go. It would send signals to the radio, change mode, send the tuning signal. You'd hear the relays click, 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 and then you'd get an indication if it was able to tune it or not. So the antenna I used the most was a Chameleon Impasse antenna, the original Impasse. And I used it with, yeah, I know, not a resonant antenna, a compromised antenna. Not efficient at all. The last thing you want to use when you're operating a QRP single sideband. But this was my first setup for HF, and I used it a good bit before my next HF radio arrived. Now, if we look at the power consumption for the FT817ND at full 5 watts transmit is 2.2 to 2.5 amp hours, and receive is 0.45, so we're less than 500 milliamps at receive. So if you think about it, a 50-50 duty cycle where you're transmitting half the time and you're listening half the time would be 1.475 amp hours. And that's heavy use. That's like on a field day where you're sitting on a frequency, you're running that frequency, you're working people, you call, somebody answers, you do the exchange, you say QRZ, somebody comes right back. That's like a park activation where you're on it all the time. I'm not talking about seeking out stations, listening a couple times to get their call, calling a couple times until you break the pile up. No, that's even less. I'm talking about a heavy duty cycle, or operating a digital mode where the transmitter's cycling on and off between the various cycles. So 1 hour heavy use, 1.475 amp hours. Okay, so think about it. 3 hours in the park, 3 times, call it 1.5, would be 4.5. 4.5 amp hours would cover 3 hours of heavy duty use. But what about a battery like this? This is a 6 amp hour battery. How many times does 1.5, which is a hour of heavy use going to 6. If my math is correct, I would say about 4 times, right? 1.5 plus 1.5 is 3. Another 2 times on top of those 2 would be 4. So that would be like, okay, in a field day situation where instead of hunting and seeking, you were holding down a frequency, which would be hard with QRP, but something like a POTA or field day or digital modes where you're like on it all the time, 4 hours for a battery like this. Also, you're using this radio maybe because it's lightweight and it's small. If you were going to need something lightweight to hike with, if you were going to need something small and lightweight to carry with you, maybe like you know, in your carry-on baggage on a plane or something like this, this would probably be pretty adequate for it, and this would not be overkill. Now, there's not a fuse between here and here, so maybe you throw in a distribution block. They've got them like this that are just distribution blocks, and your fuse can go in a cord. Maybe you have a little bit different kind of a distribution block that's got fused outlets and also throws in some USB taps. Maybe you know, you have a couple other things, but basically this is kind of like the right size for a partial day in the park. And you're like, okay, well, hold on a second. What if I may want to be out longer than 4 hours? Well, the question then is, do you carry a solar controller and a solar panel and start putting some power back in as you're using it out? Or do you just go to a larger battery? Hold on, let me show you an example. We could double our capacity from, like we said, 4 very intense hours on the 6 amp hour battery to 8 on the 12 amp hour battery. So just swapping out that one thing there, we've gone from a good long time to what's going to seem like all day long at a very productive rate, right? A 60-watt panel and a solar charge controller are going to be different shape, but probably about the same weight. So there, it may make a difference, right? Do I want to carry the same amount of stuff? But if I can depend upon sun, do I want to use that to recharge my battery? Or do I just want to carry more power into the field with me? And when the battery gives up, the battery gives up. Another thing to keep in mind is, how are you going to be logging? Are you going to be logging using paper? Or are you going to be logging using maybe a mobile phone or some other device? The longer you're out there, the more likely you may be to have another device besides your radio that also is going to benefit from using that battery. So sometimes the decision maker is what else besides the radio is going to be running off the battery. Are you going to be running your phone, a tablet, especially things like a notebook that may require more power? If you are, you may need to take both a larger battery and some sort of solar power for recharging.